Well, thank you so much for watching Morning Live. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has met the National Economic Development and Labour Council, Nedlac, their stakeholders in Johannesburg on Monday. Now, the monthly meetings are aimed at reporting on progress made since last year's job summit, as job creation continues to be a headache. Now, this month's meeting took place at the back of Nedlac's 24th summit that was held a week ago. And talking on the sidelines of the summit, Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi blamed some of the country's programs for a lack of coordination and integration, creating parallel programs. Now, the Minister Thulas Nxesi joins us now from the SABC's parliamentary studios in Cape Town. Minister, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live, and thanks for speaking to us.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to the viewers.
Minister, the backdrop against which all of these discussions are happening, very well known. The economy is sluggish, job markets are shedding jobs. What does the Nedlac setup, the monthly report, show in terms of progress that has been made?
What I can report is that there was a frustration that there is no commitment of collective engagement at a high or strategic level, either by ministers or leaders of business. But what the president has done was to say, to have those monthly meetings, the first Monday of every month, was to ensure that we are looking at the implementation of the job summit agreements, and hence then we've been able to pull all the strategic ministers who are the key in the economy. You talk finance, you talk public enterprises, you talk communication, the issues of the visas by Home Affairs, the spectrum for communication. So we have now been able to pull all those people, and we're focusing on the issues, and we are creating the forums and the direct negotiations to deal with whatever issue is outstanding, so that it's resolved, and we deal with the implementation. So what I can say, we're back in using Nedlac as a vehicle to reinvigorate that social dialogue and the issues of the social compact, and a proper progress. About 70% of the commitments made are now underway. And remember also that, Sakina, that summit took place about a year ago, and in between that and now, there's been the elections in the ruling party, general national elections, which diverted the focus of the people, and there's been change of restructuring of the government. But now there is a very clear focus on those issues, and I think the process is back on course.
But Minister, looking at Nedlac in its current format, in its current setup, you have two of your social partners. You speak of that social compact and the partners that you rely to work on this together. And they've been very scathing about what Nedlac is currently able to do, what it is able to deliver, and questioning the efficacy of Nedlac in its current form. We look back at the 24th summit. The theme there was creating jobs together, preparing for a future of work and the fourth industrial revolution. But what is the reality check as far as Nedlac goes in its current formation?
Let's first talk about this. Part of strengthening the Nedlac was to strengthen its management so that they can be able to follow up the decisions and implement them. We've been working with the acting people. Now, the process of filling the post of the executive director and the CFO, it's underway, and I suspect that by November we will be having those people so that we stabilize the institution. Secondly, the issue of perceiving Nedlac as a gatekeeper, leaving other players who are very, very crucial, like the BBC, the Black Business Council, like SAFTU. It's not an unfair comment at one level, because in my view is that Nedlac should be all-inclusive, and discussions are underway with the BBC and SAFTU have been able to indicate that there are outstanding issues of the audited statements which they must submit, because people must meet the criteria. But I can tell you that the business process program has created a number of jobs, and businesses reported that they've exceeded their expectations in accelerating what we call the youth not in employment, not in education, nor in training, called the NEET, on a number of pathways for income, and then to date 110,000 jobs and work experiences have been provided. There's a program which is called the Installation, the Repair and Maintenance Initiative, which is running up, focusing on the sectors of plumbing, electrical, automotive and infrastructure maintenance. Those programs are running, and the other program of the temporary employee relief scheme, where the UIF, working with the SITAs together with the CCMA, they are saving a lot of companies, assisting those companies in distress to face the prospect where workers are facing the prospect of retrenchment, and they are helping all those workers. And these are all the resolutions of the Job Summit. So there's a lot which is taking place. But I think the problem, we have not been able to communicate properly on what has been achieved thus far.
But if we look at what Kosatu is saying, Mr. Nxesi, Begin Nxesi, for example, and I want to quote him. He says, and this was at the end of the 24th summit that was held at the end of September. He says, and I quote, "We started last year on a high note following the influential summit we had towards the end of 2017. The outcome and promises gave us renewed hope in the form of labor law amendment, the national minimum wage, a health summit and many other things. However, 9 months later, we can confirm that we realize it was just a dream deferred," he said, adding that the commitment to social dialogue by government had become questionable. And then he goes on to say, how do we explain to our members that there was a commitment to job creation and decent wage, but instead we are receiving notices of retrenchments almost every day? And basically saying that agreements that are reached at Nedlac are often discarded. How do you respond to that? Again, speaking to the efficacy of Nedlac as a conduit. Minister?
Whenever there's frustration on any issue, people will raise those issues. It's precisely on that reason that the president decided to have these monthly meetings. And I can tell you the past 2 monthly meetings, that's where we had high-level government delegations, where we had the Minister of Finance, we had Public Enterprises, as I've said, Minister of Communication, we had DTI Ministry, all of them to focus on the issues, one of the visas, which have said to be a serious problem, the issue of the visas for tourism, the issue of the spectrum. Those were heavy discussions, and I think discussions are back on track. But of course, it's right when Labour or one of the social partners raises the problems. And I think on the basis of the past 2 meetings, I don't think Kosatu can be able to express those comments now, because the process is back on track, and some of the figures I've quoted here, you can be able to see that we are doing something, and we are continuing with that. And I've said to you, if this was reached only last year, it's not going to be an event. It is a process. The process might have been slowed down, but the process now is gaining traction and speed, and it's moving forward to deal with the issues. On some of the issues where there are disputes even between labor and business, we've been able to facilitate, put the task teams to deal with those problems which are being raised.
And then, Minister, one of the other allegations, something that, the social partners were also not very happy with, was whether, let me put it as the working relationship, and whether ministers across sectors and portfolios are actually committed to the work that needs to be done at Nedlac. And to this end, I want to ask you, do you actually have interministerial conversations, possibly between yourself and other ministers, such as Treasury, Economic Development, about employment and employment creation? Because one of the criticisms that was leveled was that key ministers actually do not attend these proceedings at Nedlac.
The fact that we have seen, particularly in the last session, high-level ministers who are key in the economy, part of that Monday meeting, it's because the president has been able to draw a line And the president has spoken that every minister who is affected is supposed to be in those forums. And mine is to ensure that I coordinate that in the preparations for all those meetings. And I think that is happening now. And I don't think ministers would be able to, if the ministers are not there, the deputies are there together with the DGs. So we are committing ourselves that at high and strategic level, we are dealing with the issues now.
And did Nedlac discuss Minister Tito Mbowene's white paper?
There are processes. There are processes within government which are dealing with those issues, and you know that stakeholders have been allowed to make their input into that particular process, and we will just await the outcome of that. But all stakeholders are allowed to make an input into that particular paper.
Now, Minister, it's been said by some of the labour unions and also you yourself that there's a lot of talk that goes on at Nedlac, and some of the social partners say it's a lot of talk shops and no implementation. Now, what is the solution to this? Because, again, going back to what was said by COSATU, what's the point of coming to agreements if you are not going to implement them? What is the solution?
Sakina, you can't say that. When I'm quoting figures and the various programs where there have been implementation of some of the job summit resolutions, I've quoted the business process programs, I've quoted what we call NEET, not in employment, not in education, nor in training programs, 110,000. I've quoted those. I've talked about the initiative called the IRM, which is the installation, repair and maintenance initiatives. All those programs are continuing. And I think the gripe is from COSATU, whilst we are dealing with those issues, and we have committed ourselves that we are going to deal with the issues of the job cards. In some instances, the employers are continuing with the retrenchments, but they've been able to explain their case that if a company is going down, what should they do? Are they able to keep the employees for the sake of keeping it? That's why we've facilitated that. Let them have the discussions at that particular level. But we are trying by all means. And remember, this is not a straight line. Some of the issues have to be negotiated. The Job Summit were the framework. Some of the issues is easy to implement, but some of them were putting the implementation programs. But I can tell you now that the President and the Deputy President have come in is to ensure that implementation takes place.
So, but my question is not unfair, Minister. I think you will concede because there are issues in this regard. If we look at the pre-strike balloting issue, for example, again, there the unions felt that, again, you just simply discarded what was agreed upon.
What was agreed upon?
With regard
because
to
my understanding is that, my understanding is very simple. The issue of the amendments and the issues of the strike, that's an issue which went through Nedlac. And the issue of balloting, even at the time I was in the trade union movement in 2009, other unions were already balloting and other unions were not balloting. But now that issue has been dealt with to say we are going to ballot, and other people, the dispute is about whether an illegal strike is an unlawful strike. That is the debate which the unions were having.
What about the change to labour legislation? What about the change to labour legislation? What was agreed upon in that regard?
That change to labour legislation was agreed that there is going to be an amendment to talk about the issue of the ballot in the strike. The people who have complained are the people who are outside Nedlac.
And that is simply the point I'm making, Minister, that there are concerns about agreements that are reached and perhaps in the end something else resulting. And I'm sure you are aware. You are aware. As you said, it's not a straight line.
I'm aware, Sakina. The issue is that there will always be complaints, even if you can try and negotiate very hard to have consensus. Sometimes it's difficult to have 100% consensus, but there is general consensus that those issues should be in the legislation, and they have been accepted by all the parties in Nedlac. I'm not talking about our people who are outside Nedlac.
But of course, even those who are outside Nedlac, by your earlier admission, there are perhaps people that should be incorporated as other social partners. And even Busa was saying, you know, maybe there does need to be a reconfiguration of what goes on at Nedlac and how it is currently constituted.
And then they have to meet the requirements. You can't just open this thing and you have a proliferation of the unions. You encourage that. There are certain requirements they are supposed to meet, and then once they meet those requirements, they will be accepted. And I'm the one who has committed myself to say Nedlac should be all-inclusive, and we have to relook and review the protocols to make it sure that everybody is included. But it doesn't mean that we must remove the requirements.
Minister, I want to talk about other issues as well. Last week, COSATU and its affiliate SASPO, representing labour workforce, said that they felt let down by Nedlac. What's your view on how things actually turned for the banking sector workforce?
We must just accept one thing, that these days there is a lot of technological change, and we are not going to be able to stop technology in moving forward. We must accept first that. However, we must be able to say, I hear other people talking about the 4IR, they're talking about digitalization, automation, and so on. The reality is that that is also coming. But the issue is, what do we do to prepare our workforce for that? Hence, we've been talking about a just transition. A transition to say, as you are coming with these new technologies, how do you prepare the workforce through upskilling them, through training, through retraining? Those are the major issues which we are focusing on. And we must accept that technology is going to be disruptive socially and economically to the workers. But the issue of upscaling, training, and retraining is going to be very important. And I've been urging both sides, the banking sector, I've been urging the unions who are organizing in that. Yes, there's a right to strike. Yes, there's a right to lock out. But the issue, they will have to sit down and negotiate these issues and say, what are the alternatives for these workers? And we come in as government and we put together programs which are going to help those workers who might be the victims of the technological change. But there must be discussions.
And that brings us to the issue of education and skills, which, as you point out, seems to be one of the biggest challenges that we face in the workplace today. And what's your view on that currently?
See, as a teacher, what's the aim of education? The aim of education is not just skills. Skills is part of education. But we must also be fair and say, we've not done enough in terms of vocational education. And it's correct to say we can continue training, but if we're also not looking into the side of the skills, the market or the business is going to continue to say you don't have the right skills. And I think this is an area for higher education. This is an area even for us. Some of the workers who get retrenched, what are we doing with our money in the UIF, in the compensation fund, the skills fund? How do we ensure that we up the skill of the vocational skill in particular, of those workers, of those who are coming from the universities, and even these who are, because they are children, there are children who started school at grade 1 and they could not be able to go out at matric level, and they just fall into the cracks. And that is the biggest threat. How do we skill all those people? So the issue of skills development is very central in dealing with this particular problem. And everybody has been able to say the unemployment in South Africa is structural, it's linked to the skills. Therefore, you need a skills revolution to deal with these issues. And the TVETs, the universities must come into the party. They can't just educate for the sake of educating. They must be able to target in some areas on these particular skills, which are the scarce skills also.
But they can't do that without input from business, one would imagine, because it is business who is going to absorb this workforce, and they therefore have to play a pivotal role in actually, in fact, helping structure the curriculum that these institutions of higher learning would actually implement. Wouldn't you say, Minister?
quite correct. You need all the stakeholders, you need the business, but also not just input in terms of say this is what we want. Also adding their own resources, combining the resources of government, combining with the resources of business and so on, and then we come up with programs which are targeting particular sectors where we see that we can be able to create jobs.
Well, Minister Nxesi, thank you so much for your time this morning and speaking there to Minister of Labour, Thulas Nxesi, discussing labour-related issues. And of course, as always, we welcome your comments on the discussions that we have at Morning Live SABC. And we'll see. We didn't have a question of the day this morning, but we'll see if we can maybe share some of your comments on the interviews that we've done this morning. And with that said, we are going to go now.